Hi, everyone. Welcome to G2I's community event. Today, we're going to be talking about evolving technical interviews for the AI era. Today, we have our guest, David Gomes, joining us from Neon, recently acquired by Databricks, so technically from Databricks, speaking to us about how they completely reimagined their technical interview process after discovering their candidates were using AI coding assistants. So instead of fighting against this trend, they embraced it, creating a completely new, explicitly AI powered technical interview, possibly one of the first in the industry. So, included in today's talk, David's also going to share their actual interview exercise and concrete data from this experience, offering both hiring teams and candidates a glimpse into what could become the new standard for technical assessments in this AI era. So, super exciting. To introduce myself, my name is Michelle Bakels. I'm Senior Technical Program Director at G2I. And while I'm sure most of you are familiar with G2I, if you're joining us for the first time, a little bit about us. It's our mission to create custom talent pipelines so our clients don't have to. We have a unique approach that combines customizable vetting, flexible terms, and tailored customer service that gives us an advantage. So whether you're hiring 1,000 engineers to work on complex AI projects or you need highly skilled individuals for your MVP, we can scale to your needs. And lastly, since we grew up in the open source ecosystem, we host our annual software developers conference, React Miami, every April. Those details are starting to come out on reactmiami.com, but there will be more coming soon. And actually, David joined us last April and was a speaker at our conference as well. So it's great to see him again. A little bit about how to engage with this session. We have three different ways to participate. So we have first our chat. As we go along, feel free to write anything in the chat, leave your thoughts, opinions. Um, David's going to focus on just presenting his topic, but we can go through the chat later. And then there's a separate section for questions. So after this is all over, we are going to do a Q&A and we are going to read all of your questions. So be sure to leave your questions specifically in the Q&A section of this Zoom webinar, and we will get those answered at the end. And while David is going to be sharing his screen and paying attention to his presentation, we also have emoji reactions. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult presenting online because you can't really see the audience reaction. So if David makes a funny joke or if he says something that you like, leave some emoji reactions. It's good encouragement. So without further ado, I'm going to just do a quick introduction of David before I kick it off to him. Again, David Gomes is the lead engineer was at Neon recently, now acquired by Databricks, who helped reshape how they evaluated engineering talent and is now bringing that knowledge over to this new company, big company. So that's very exciting. He has a background in competitive programming, which is super cool. Sounds really cool. And extensive experience in technical interviews. So he can bring a practical perspective on adapting engineering practices to embrace rather than resist technological change. So with that said, that's my intro. This is a hot topic right now, super hot topic right now. So I'm really excited to hear from David. I'm going to kick it over to you.
Hello, thank you, Michelle. Let me just get my screen share right here. I wanted to start by saying, yeah, I did attend React Miami and I already bought my ticket for next year. So highly recommend everyone to take a look at the conference. I had a blast and I'm coming back in April next year. But let's talk about interviews. A not so much talked about topic. A lot of industry secrets. A lot of companies don't like to talk about their interview process for some obvious reasons. But I think it's important to be transparent, and I think it's important to share. I've been working as an engineering manager for 6 years. I've been giving interviews for almost 10 years. At my previous company, whenever you join the company, even as a new grad, in the first 2 months, you would be giving interviews. So I've probably given more than 1,000 interviews, and it's something that not a lot of people enjoy, but I've taken a liking to it, and I've also spent a lot of time just thinking about it, researching and writing. So if you're curious, check out my blog, davidgomes.com, where I've written extensively about hiring processes, how to grow engineering teams, how to approach the recruiting process, And of course, I'm going to share my slides with everyone later. So any link, like my blog's link, don't worry about copying it now. You will have access to everything at the end. So for today, we're going to do a reflection on adopting AI and LLM enhanced coding for technical software engineering interviews. And I wanted to sort of start by asking everyone who's already using AI on their day-to-day for writing code. Like, are you using Cursor? Are you using Windsurf? I see some reactions. I see some chat, and um, I think it's very common, right? I think it's something we've all already adopted, but a lot of companies have not adopted that into their interview process. And today we're going to reflect on why that is and how companies could start doing it. Let's talk about a very specific interview. It's called the Memcached interview. It's a notorious interview, especially since Arthur O'Dwyer wrote about it in these two infamous blog posts that went extremely viral a few years ago. And his interview was something that we gave at my previous company, MemSQL/SingleStore. And it is a very practical interview, and it is an interview that candidates usually really enjoy. So again, if you want to learn more about the interview, check out Arthur's blog. He goes really in depth into the entire process. I'm just going to give you a very succinct summary. So the first part of this interview is cloning a repository on your own machine. So this is not one of those whiteboard interviews. You're not writing code on Google Docs. You're actually cloning a real repository from GitHub, and then you're building it locally. And that repository is for Memcached. If you haven't heard about Memcached, it's an open source key value store. It's very similar to products like Redis, products like Valkey. It's an in-memory key value store. And you can interact with this key value store using a text interface. So you can run commands like set x equals 25, which will create an x key with the value 25. And then you can do certain operations. So you can do things like incr x2 to increase the value of the x key by 2. You can also run a get command to get back the value of the x key, and you can run a decker command, decr, which will decrease the value of the x key by a certain amount. So the candidates go through this. We explain everything that I've also explained to you so far. And then we tell them that we would like them to implement a mult command. Now, Memcached does not have a mult command. It only has an incr and a decker command. So this is essentially a new feature that they have to add. And then we also tell the candidates that the implementation has to be atomic. If you don't know what this means, essentially, it means that if there's two threads connected to Memcached server, and one performs the multiplication operation, the other thread should never see an intermediate value of the multiplication operation. So essentially what we're saying is you can't just perform multiplication by issuing a series of incrementation commands. You have to actually implement the multiplication operation inside some type of lock. Finally, we tell candidates that they cannot break any existing features. So incr, decker, any other memcached feature still has to work by the time that they're done. And then the timer starts. And we grade candidates based on how long they take. So we do tell candidates like we are looking for efficiency here. We want to see basically how fast you can do this. And there's a little bit of a time pressure here that we put candidates on. And this interview has now been given thousands of times at memsql/SingleStore. I received this interview for the first time back in 2015. When I left this company a few years ago, we were still giving this interview, but it's now been more than leaked throughout the entire internet. And it is really an incredible test for several different skills, but also culture fit. So a lot of candidates, we could basically measure how engaged they were with the exercise, and we were looking for some type of enthusiasm. Like it's obviously much more appealing to hire people that are excited by this type of exercise. And the reason for that is that this exercise is a almost perfect simulation of someone's first day on the job. You clone a repository. We ask you to perform some small tasks, some new feature, some small change, and you have to do it on your own. So it's a 1 hour simulation of the first day on the job. And seniors can fail this interview, juniors can fail this interview. Obviously, juniors fail it a lot more on average, but I've seen all kinds of people fail it. And one nice thing about this interview is that if someone looks like they're going to fail, if they're getting stuck, if they're having issues, the interviewer can always jump in and help that person. And in certain situations, we can help them to the point that we're basically hand-holding them and arriving to the solution together so that the candidate still feels like they passed the interview. Which is a really important thing because we want every candidate to have a positive experience. I was taught this very early on. You want candidates to have a really good experience because you want them to exit the interview process thinking that this is a great company and thinking that they should recommend it to their friends who maybe will perform better. So in extreme situations, we would just handhold the candidates towards a solution. But overall, the feedback was amazing. Like candidates really enjoy this interview. It's the interview that I've given where I've received the most positive feedback. I get emails from people telling me they enjoyed it. To this day, everyone still talks about this interview as a shining moment of their careers. I still vividly remember being given this interview for the first time, and I have very positive memories about it. Let's jump into numbers. Most people who do solve it take around 30 to 45 minutes. That's a pass. Um, we give candidates around 50 minutes to do this since the call is 1 hour. Strong engineers will solve it in under 20 minutes. I've seen record times of under 15. I think I've seen someone do it in just over 10 minutes in the past. Um, but under 10 minutes is basically impossible. And many people fail, right? Like it's definitely a good filter. Um, and what we're here to talk about today is how AIs perform at this interview. And I gave it a crack over the weekend. I asked Cursor to solve this interview, and it one-shot it in under 2 minutes. When I say one shot, it means I only had to give Cursor one prompt. That's what a one shot means. So let's take a look. I'm going to share a video here. And this is me prompting Cursor. And then it'll read as much code as it needs on the Memcached repository. It's a pretty large repository. It just figures out where to edit the code, where to write the code. It writes all of the code. And then it even asks me if I wanted to test the implementation, but I say, no, no, don't worry, I'll test it myself. I open my terminal and I tested that Cursor successfully solved the interview. Great job, Cursor. Um, Let me just exit the video. Okay. Um, so what should we do about this? So if Cursor can one-shot this interview, should we continue to give this interview? Does it still make sense now that everyone has Cursor? Um, and or should we instead just forbid people from using AI and ask them to basically write code like in the old days and see whether they can make it? Essentially, what we're asking is what kinds of skills are we looking for in the software engineers that we're hiring today? Um, and before we answer this question, let's take a step back. I asked in the beginning how many of you are using AI to write code. The truth is, and this is from the last GitHub survey, almost everyone is already using AI in some shape or form. And maybe you're not using Cursor or Windsurf or Codex or OpenCode or Claude Code, but you're definitely popping into ChatGPT every now and then. And so AI has definitely become completely integrated into our workflows as software engineers. In fact, I just recently joined a really big company, right? As Michelle said, Last month, I was onboarded into Databricks as part of an acquisition. Databricks is a 10,000 person company. And guess what? All of our laptops come pre-installed with Cursor. VS Code is not installed, Vim is not installed, but Cursor is pre-installed. And that is I think, really big sign that these tools are here to stay, that even big companies like Databricks are pre-installing this type of software for their engineers. So if we're using AI at work, and if AI is completely spread out and being adopted everywhere, should we use it for our interviews? And I recently tweeted about this, and like my opinion on this is fairly let's say obvious. Like I have a pretty strong opinion that we should be using AI, as you probably already realized. But I found out from some people that not everyone sees it this way. And in fact, one theme that I heard a lot was when our candidates use AI, they struggle and they fail even more, which is interesting because a lot of people would assume the opposite, that AI is so good that it makes interviews redundant. But I also received the opposite feedback, which is when candidates use AI, they tend to fail interviews more. So let's try to understand that first. Like, how could that happen? Um, and then we'll get to the question why we should embrace AI for software engineering interviews. So let's look at a different interview, like Memcached. We've talked about that. Let's talk about another interview. And this is called the Async Queue interview. So I recently blogged about Async Queue. It is another one of my favorite programming interviews. I've definitely given it more than 100 times just myself. Um, and I think in total at my previous company, we probably gave it between 500 and 1,000 times. So we have a lot of data on it. And it really is a fantastic interview. It is a little bit hard to explain, so I'll try my best to explain it in under 5 minutes. Um, so please bear with me. This is going to be a little bit intense, okay? So the interview goes like this. We tell candidates, hey, we are working on a client, like a web app, for instance, and our client talks to a server, but that server is faulty. If the server has to handle multiple requests at once, it starts to break down. So as a team, we decide to make our server's life easier by trying to ensure from the client side that the server never has to queue more than one request at once. So at least for that one client, it will never have to think about queuing multiple requests. We make sure that from the client, we're only waiting for at most one request from the server at any given point in time. And by the way, this is a real problem that we actually had at work. And so we just converted the real problem that we had on the job into an interview. That's the best kind of interview, in my opinion. So then we tell candidates, we have this send function, and the send function is a black box. Don't worry about its implementation. You're never going to see it. It's just a very simple function. It receives some payload and it receives a callback. And whenever the server is done with that request, the send function will make sure that the callback function is called. So you can see on the right here, the client is calling send with some payload A, and then a bit afterwards, it's calling the server again with payload B, and then eventually the server returns. And this doesn't have to be in order, by the way, so it's possible that the server would even respond for payload B before it responds with payload A, right? That could totally happen. But the point is send is a black box. We don't care about its implementation. It exists and it is being called all over the code base. So there's a bunch of different places in our code base where we are calling send. And then we tell candidates, we would like you to implement a new function called send once. And we would like send once to be a different version of send that ensures that we are never having the server work on more than one request at a time. So send once should in some way use the send function to make sure that only one request is being processed by the server at any given point in time. And this is what a naive implementation looks like. I've seen this kind of implementation a lot of times. You basically create some sort of queue, which is just an array, and then you implement the send once function. And what you do is if the queue is empty, you call the server. If the queue is not empty, you push to the queue. And what's interesting about this is that when we call the server with send, we wrap the callback, the original callback, we wrap it and we call the original callback, and then at the end, we process the next request in the queue. And we do that with this process next request function, which just does the same thing. It checks if the queue is empty, and if it is not, we pop from the queue using the shift function in JavaScript, and then we call the server. It looks correct at a first glance, but it is not correct. It is in fact buggy. And the bug here is that if two places in our code base call send once immediately one after the other, we will call send twice one after the other because we're not actually pushing the request to the queue if the queue is empty. And so it's possible that the server ends up working on more than one request at a time. A correct solution looks like this. We have an array, which is again the queue, and we have another flag called isProcessing. And this isProcessing flag is used to know if the server is working on something or not. And we use this flag in order to know whether we can call the server or not, and we reset this flag whenever our server returns. We know that from the send callback function. So this is actually a little simpler, the code here, and this one is correct. You would successfully complete this part of the interview. So far, so good. Usually candidates can do this in like 15 minutes, oftentimes much less. But then we make it more interesting. And then we say, okay, now we want another requirement. We want the send once function to have a third argument called minimum delay, min delay for short, that allows us to delay the time by which the request is sent to the server by some minimum amount, right? We cannot define the precise delay, but because the queue might be big and we don't know exactly when our request is going to go to the server, right? There might be a lot of requests in the queue, but we don't want to send it to the server for at least some amount of time. Implementation, again, is very straightforward. If you're used to JavaScript, you can probably crack this very quickly. You just wrap your entire send once function in a set timeout, and you're good to go. Then after that, we can make the interview even more interesting. Like there are so many things that we can ask the candidate to do. So usually we would ask people to implement another function called send many, which is a send once that happens on an interval. So every X seconds, it's doing a send once. We also ask candidates to implement a cancellation mechanism so that you can call send once and then later on cancel it if needed. So let's say you call send once and then for some reason you want to remove that item from the queue, you should be able to do that. And we even leave the API design up to the candidate. So now we're not just testing their coding skills, but also their API design skills. Then we ask for a retry mechanism for send once. Let's say the request fails. How can we allow for retries and for clients of this API to define some number of retries? Then we ask for tests. This is my favorite part of the interview is when we ask candidates to write tests because we want to see that they write comprehensive unit tests for the send once function, for the send many function, for everything, for cancellations, for retries. Tests should be really, really good and they should cover as many edge cases as possible. Okay, so what about this interview? Can AI crack this interview? And this one is a lot harder. Like it's a much harder interview, much more complete. It's very likely that to solve everything, you're going to need more than 1 hour. So can AI crack this one? And it can. So this is me using Replit. If you haven't heard of Replit, Replit.com, amazing web IDE, which has AI embedded into it. And I prompted it to implement basically send once with delay and send many, and it was able to crack all of those. I also dabbled with writing tests. It did a really good job, but with a caveat, which is that you have to prompt the LLM really well. So it's very easy for an LLM to write something like this. The naive implementation that I showed you before is something that, especially the older models, would totally just write. The newer models are obviously better, and so it's more likely that they'll write something correct. But still, you have to prompt them properly. If you notice at the top here, you can't see it, but I did give Claude, in this case, I did give it a pretty good prompt. I explained a lot of the context. I gave it the signature for the function, and that's how it was able to implement send once. And in this screenshot, I'm showing you send once with delay. So you need proper prompting. And even with proper prompting, expect some bugs. This kind of, let's say, tricky interview with lots of edge cases and potential for bugs um, is very easy for LLMs to get wrong in the same way that it's very easy for engineers to get wrong, right? Um, and so if you are using AI to solve this interview, you need to focus on writing really good prompts. And then also, you need to do really good code review. And if you're only going to take one thing away from this entire talk, it's this third bullet point here. Code review is harder than writing code. And if you're doubting that, just think about how hard it was for you to review the code that I showed you on the previous slides. Like when you get shown these like 20 lines of code, it's really hard to wrap your mind around it. It's often much easier for you to just write that code from scratch. Um, so code review is one of the hardest skills in software engineering. And now with AI, we're spending a lot more time reviewing code than before because we're using autocomplete, we're using prompts, we're having cursor write code for us. And so we're constantly needing to review code that was written by an AI, not just in pull requests, but in our own IDE, we're spending time doing code review every minute. So my experience so far of giving these interviews and other interviews that I didn't share today with AI is that candidates are too shy to use it. So even when I tell people like, hey, please use AI, it'll make your job easier and you'll be able to do this exercise faster, people are really shy about it and they won't use it until I really instruct them to do so. Secondly, the level of prompting ability from different engineers varies tremendously. Most candidates I've interviewed are below what I would say is my threshold for having decent prompting skills. Um, it's clear that this is a new technology that most of us are still like in the early adoption phases of. And so it's hard for engineers to really, level up their prompting skills. And then on more complex interviews, most candidates are not creative enough. So maybe they'll use AI for like small things, small functions, and they'll use autocomplete, but they're not actually going to use it to explore the code base or to write tests or to find edge cases. Um, and that's a shame. I think, we all have to level up and I know it's hard, but I think it's important because that's the future. Finally, I recommend that you all create interesting, rich interview exercises that can be taken to the next level and the next level and the next level after that. So an interview like Async Queue, it's basically perfect for the age of AI because it's basically limitless. Like I said, you could go on for 2 hours just asking candidates for more and more and more requirements. And the ones that are AI native, the engineers that can use AI to their advantage, will just be able to knock each requirement off much more quickly. And they'll be able to do send once with delay, send many, tests, retries, cancellation. They'll get all of the features done in less than an hour. It's totally possible. Without AI, forget about it. It's too hard to do everything in less than an hour. And then for interviews like the Memcached interview, like I said, we used to give candidates 50 minutes, but Cursor can do it in just 1 minute or 2 minutes. So if you're going to keep an interview like Memcached, or if you're going to design an interview like Memcached, which is all about exploring a new code base, simulating your first day on the job, then you need to add a lot of complexity to the interview. You need to add not just a mult command, you need more commands, you need tests, you need bigger features. You need a way for the interview to grow to the level of the ability of the candidate. So you need to make that type of code base exploration and code base augmentation interview much more complete by having as many requirements and new features as possible, and perhaps make those incrementally harder so that the interview is fun, right? You start by working on Molt. That's an easy thing. Cursor can do it in 2 minutes. You didn't even have to write any code. But then for the requirements down the road, you're having to write some code because the AI cannot do it all for you. So that's it for me. Again, I will be sharing the slides with everyone later. So if you want to nerd out about these two interviews, there's great blog post links to learn more about them. If you want to just do them on your own, just for fun, and highly encourage that. Hopefully, I didn't spoil them too much. And then if you want to just talk to me, I'm available on a bunch of different social media. And here's my work email as well. I think we have some Q&A. I see a lot of messages in the chat, so maybe we'll get to that, right, Michelle?
Yep, we will. So thanks so much. Great presentation and topic. Of course, we were like definitely fully expecting this to be an awesome presentation today, and it was. So thank you also for sharing your interview questions. I think that really like color the conversation a lot. Um, there are some questions here, but I want to ask one first myself, which I never do. I always save mine for the end, but I'm really curious. You have I don't remember if you mentioned this, but I know you said that the Databricks computers come with Cursor already pre-installed. So you're kind of sort of
Yes.
setting that expectation that people are going to be using AI tools for their work. Um, and so, of course, I understand that for doing these challenges. What are your opinions on tools that are coming out right now, like Cluely, which is like very controversial right now? If you're unfamiliar with Cluely, their tagline is cheat on everything. And they just raised $15 million from A16Z. And it's a really controversial raise, and people have like really strong opinions. How does that play into this? I mean, sorry, a little bit more backstory. The founder of Cluely kind of came into fame by famously beating, Amazon's technical interviews, or like, these FANG technical interviews, and getting offers by essentially using an AI plugin in the browser. Um, and then they got their offers rescinded afterwards. So, with all of that context, how do you feel about people using whatever tools they want? Like, do you designate the tool, or if somebody came to your interview using Cluely, are you like, that's fair game?
First of all, I love Riley. I'm a big fan. If you're not following him on social media, you definitely should. He's a quite a character, and I think the Cluely product, maybe not in its current iteration, but in some future iteration, is just going to be something everyone has installed on their computer. Maybe it's not going to be called Cluely. Maybe someone else will develop a better product. But I think in the next few years, everyone will have something on their computer. There is just constantly helping them out as they're joining meetings, giving interviews, receiving interviews, um, like basically an assistant that is like available 24/7 on your laptop, and maybe eventually on your phone as well. So I think that's the future, and I think we should embrace it. If your interviews are so poorly designed that Cluely can solve them for you, um, and you cannot detect that someone is like just verbatim copy pasting their the solution from Cluely's window into whatever editor you're using with the candidate, I don't think you have a good interview process. I think you can create much more rich, much more interesting interviews, such as the ones that I described today. Unfortunately, Amazon and other FAANG companies are notorious for having interviews that are essentially university level exercises, right? They're like very well researched, well studied, um, very almost brain dead, I would say, challenges that don't really test like more than whether someone just studied a lot. And so Cluely is going to do great at those, right? I mean, it's just a ChatGPT wrapper at the end of the day. So ChatGPT or any other model is going to be able to perform really well on that type of exercise. Um, I would recommend Amazon and other companies that have this kind of interview to rethink what they're doing. And as for Cluely, I already said what I had to say. I haven't tried the product, but I'm a big fan of Roy, and I think we'll all have something like Cluely on our computers in the future.
Good take. Yeah, fair take. Um, yeah, totally understand that. So let me get into the Q&A from our attendees that are joining us. The first question is really interesting. How would you say juniors can prepare for interviews like this better? That's really a good question because it kind of speaks to that unspoken context here where you do have to have somewhat experience to know how to prompt well and like one shot these things. So how do juniors prepare for an interview like this?
Yeah. First of all, I would ask your interviewer if you're going to be able to use LLMs, especially larger companies. They sometimes have like interview packets and things like that that they send out to candidates to help them prepare. So I would start by figuring out the companies that you're applying to. If they're not letting you use AI, then you should probably be practicing without AI, which is a shame in my opinion, but it is what it is. And then for companies that are adopting AI, you should um, basically go through like the same kinds of exercises that I talked about today. Um, and you can just ask Perplexity for interviews that are similar to Async Queue, for example, and try to solve them on your own using Replit, for example. It's a great tool. So you don't even have to leave your browser and you can just crank these out and practice if you want to be more prepared.
Yep. Yeah. Sounds good. All right. So Angel asks, curious to hear if this then means that anyone who doesn't use AI in coding wouldn't be a good fit for your team. So if they're not using AI tools to code, is that a culture mismatch?
Um, so at my current company, there's a few engineers that don't use AI. And these engineers are working on low-level systems where AI is still mostly useless. So if you're working on distributed systems, networking, low-level storage, AI is just it just gets in the way, like it won't help you. And if you're doing that kind of work, obviously the interviews should match that kind of work, and that type of interview, AI won't help you. Um, but for my team specifically, if you're not using AI, you'll never be efficient enough. So I don't have a mandate. I don't tell people you have to use AI. I'm not going to tell people what IDE they should use. I don't care. But it is true that if you're not using AI, you'll not be moving fast enough. Like it's the level of advantage you get by using AI is so massive today that you would clearly not be performing at the level that I would expect.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that I think that there is so much easily verifiable code, like especially if you have experience, that if you have AI helping you with your coding, there are so many things where it's like it starts to grasp the idea of what you're doing. And like let's say in the context of a React application or something, you start to define a variable and the AI can sort of infer what's coming next and what you're going to do with it. And you can sort of like tab, 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 yep, yep, yep. And it's all of those like small advantages, they really add up. it doesn't have to even be anything super complex that it's doing, like these, one-shotting 200 lines of code. It's like even all of these one-liners in a component just really starts to add up. I agree that especially, I mean, I'm not sure exactly what part of like which projects you're working on or what part of those projects you're working on, but I would say like speaking as a front-end developer, it's really hard to imagine that you wouldn't use it.
Agreed.
Okay, so now that you're at now that you're at Databricks, how will this approach scale how will this approach scale across a larger organization? Are you carrying it over?
Too soon to tell. It's only been a month, and I haven't been onboarded into the Databricks interviewing um, program, so I have no idea. Like we basically haven't I haven't done any interviews in the last 4 weeks. Uh, Everything is sort of paused as part of the acquisition on that end. So ask me again in 3 months, and I'll let you know.
Yeah, the acquisition is very fresh. I know you guys are still getting set up, but hopefully they kind of adopt this because I think it does make a lot of sense. So the next question we have is, what are the best prompts you'd give a dev to be able to use AI to help them better?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Sanjana, please feel free to I'll elaborate in the chat. I have an idea of what this question is asking just because we did a 6-part AI development series and we got a similar question to like some people suggested that you sort of prime your prompts with a context of, you are this kind of a developer, you have this experience, or, like the kind of the meme of like, don't make any mistakes, you know? Are there any sort of like support prompts or contexts that you recommend or that you found
Okay.
to work well?
Yeah, yeah. First thing is don't be lazy about prompting. It's like put in the time, putting in the time earlier on is gonna benefit you in the long run. So if you notice for my slides, the prompts that I wrote for both interviews were really long and detailed and with examples, and they were written in very correct English. Like I made sure to hone my prompt really well. Give examples. I think that's the main thing. So in the case of Memcached, I actually showed how I wanted the multi-command to work, and what output it should give. So just make them longer. Longer is usually better. Make them more detailed, and don't be lazy. Like put in the effort.
I agree with that. Yeah, I sometimes just for curiosity's sake, I'll see how low context I can get away with, but that's mostly just for fun. I think when I really, really need something like laser focused and highly specific, the more you write, the better it goes every time.
And it's not just prompts nowadays. So one thing that I could maybe mention now is Michelle was talking about front-end development. If you're doing front-end and you don't give your agent, for example, a cursor, the ability to interact with your app, you're missing out on so much. Cursor can just be so much better if it can actually interact with a real browser and play with your UI. It can solve tasks and it can actually inspect them, and it can go back and it can iterate, it can go in these loops to finalize whatever task you give it. So if you're using Cursor, for example, I highly recommend the browser-based MCP so that you basically give Cursor the ability to play with the UI. And in this case, it is not just operating blindly on your code. Just like engineers working on a front end, they'll often switch back from their code and their browser to see what they're working on. Imagine if you could not go to the browser and you had to write all of your code without ever going to the browser and inspecting what you're building. That would be so hard, right? You're putting LLMs in the same position by not empowering them with tools like MCP servers, and the browser-based one is just excellent. So I would say it's more than prompts, like it's tools and prompts nowadays.
What do you think about cursor rules? I just saw a
Cursor,
post from
yeah.
Kent Dodds the other day. He's like, I don't know if I'm holding it wrong, but I haven't used cursor rules yet. I haven't either, to be honest. You?
We have cursor rules in some of our projects. Um, I've noticed them to be generally useful, but I think as models get better, it will become even less relevant. So if you're already not using them today and you're finding success, I wouldn't worry too much about them. One thing you can do is just ask cursor to generate them. And you're basically using an LLM to generate your cursor rules, and it'll do a good enough job. So just that is probably fine. And eventually they won't even be needed. I think in the
Mhm.
future, that's just gonna go away.
Yeah, I can see that as well. Okay, so next question we have, did requiring AI in interviews change how your existing engineers work?
No, it didn't. We don't require AI. We just strongly encourage it for certain interviews. And it didn't change how our engineers work.
Okay. Okay, the next two questions are sort of similar, so I'm going to ask these a little bit out of order. What percentage of candidates pass your interviews now versus before?
Less. I
Less.
can't quantify it, but it's less. Yeah, because a lot of the people that I've been interviewing, just as someone noted in the chat, they come from a company where AI is maybe not allowed, right? So they don't even they've never used Cursor in their life. They've never used Windsurf, um, and my bar for what an engineer can achieve in an hour has increased a lot,
Hmm.
but these engineers are not up to date, right? So less people are passing.
Interesting. So it's like a whole new um metric of assessment, like a whole new assessment metric in the interview process is not just are you solving the problem, but how effectively are you using the AI that you're using?
No, 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 I wouldn't put it that way, Michelle.
Okay.
I measure outcomes. So I measure
Hmm.
how much can you do in an hour.
Okay.
And if you're not using AI, you're just not going to be able to achieve as much. Like you're going to
Hmm.
be effectively slower. If you're like imagining like a hypothetical situation where someone can type code at the speed of light and they can achieve everything in without AI in an hour, I would still pass someone, right? But it's just realistically, they're not achieving as much in that 1 hour of time that we give candidates.
Okay, so that sort of actually answers the question that sort of paired with this, which is what are you actually measuring now versus what you measured before,
I measure the same thing. I measure the same thing. It's just the bar has raised.
the outcomes.
Yeah.
Okay, so this one question for David. Sorry, I joined late. What would be the things you would look for in a potential dev candidate in a world full of integrated LLMs, assuming they can do the dev work? Okay, there's another
Well, we
question
still
under
need,
that, but
yeah,
I'll save
we
it.
still need people. We still need people, right? We just want people that are empowered. I'm not going to replace engineers with LLMs. Maybe we'll need less engineers to achieve the same outcome. Love that word. But we still need engineers. And so I'm still going to hire engineers. I just expect them to know how to empower themselves with these tools.
Mhm. Okay, so this question we get pretty often to be interesting to hear your perspective, especially because you work on a very data focused company. How safe is our code when using AI from a privacy point of view?
Uh, Sort of depends on your compliance requirements and privacy restrictions. I know certain companies have these things forbidden internally, but look, Databricks, 10,000 person company making almost $4 billion a year, with basically only enterprise customers ranging from basically Fortune 5 all the way to Fortune 100, 500, and 1000. And like I said, Cursor comes pre-installed. So we do trust companies like Anthropic and OpenAI to access, well, to basically, we feed them parts of our code, right? When we're using Cursor, Cursor is sending parts of your code to these LLM providers. Um, you're at a risk, right? Like, Anthropic and OpenAI could be collecting little pieces of data from your code bases. They have terms of service that hopefully you can comply with, but it's not that different from trusting GitHub. At the end of the day, if you're putting your code in GitHub, you trust that GitHub won't leak it. giving parts of your code to OpenAI, it's the same thing. It's just OpenAI is maybe a smaller company than GitHub, so they have less of a reputation, but it's the same thing.
Mm, interesting. Um, yeah, I that's always that comes up all the time. It's definitely like top three things people ask or wonder about. But I think we're a few years into this now where I think the benefits of developing with AI are so clear
Yeah.
that it's really like the responsibility of the company to figure out the answer to that question for themselves, and to like highly prioritize figuring out the answer to that question if it's a blocker. Okay, so next question. Do you also use AI for evaluating the developer's performance? We're thinking about doing that in my team, but haven't fully realized a solution yet.
I do not. Again, evaluate outcomes.
Mm.
Um, that's our word of the day here. I look for what value you're producing to the org. I don't even care if you're using AI on day to day, right? However you're being productive, that's up to each engineer on my team. I don't think I would use AI to evaluate someone. That maybe in 5 years there's something out there, but I don't feel the need for it. Like I look at the engineers and I look at what they're producing and how they're operating. Um, and that's how I manage my team.
I mean, you've done effectively like definitely over 1,000 interviews, I think you mentioned, you
Yeah.
know, so you have a really strong like gut instinct for evaluating candidates, I'm sure, after all of the experience that you have.
Yeah, I don't see how AI could be useful for this right now.
Mm. So, do you know of other companies who encourage AI usage in their recruitment process for developers? This is the next question we get from Sal.
I don't know off the top of my head, but there was a thread on Hacker News over the last couple of days about using AI for coding. It was actually like the Async Queue blog post that I mentioned before. It was on Hacker News for a couple of days, and I distinctively remember in the comments there were some people talking about that. So I would just, if you're really curious, go on Hacker News, try to figure it out. But I don't know any at the top of my head.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you. That's all the questions that we have actually. So that wraps up our Q&A and our session today. Thank you so much, David, for joining us. I always do this at the end of every session. Um, I always ask you if there's any parting wisdom that you want to leave us with, you're welcome to share anything that you didn't get to say or touch on or a belief that you hold in this area, or if you just want to tell like a dad joke that you really like it's all yours. Just any last thought you want to leave us with.
Don't be shy to reach out. I'm very open to um, impromptu conversations. So add me on LinkedIn, reach out however you prefer, and let's stay in touch.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you, David. This recording will be sent out via email. They posted that in the chat. She's going to handle all of this. And thanks, everyone, for joining. Thanks, David, for speaking. And we'll see you at the next one. Bye, everyone.